no condition to receive intruders. The opalescent light of the rainforest distorted his perception, straining his memory banks for parallels, operational cues. His last experience with the forces of nature had been the Colorado rafting trip he'd taken to impress his new secretary. He had returned home, toting 8 boxes of slides, only to find she'd joined the Hare Krishnas in his absence. It was now possible that he would have to spend the night in a jungle. Whitehill knew the importance of keeping his head, but many seconds passed before he could anchor his scrambled thoughts in the present. Ryder or one of the others he had met at the cafe last night might ask after him, but that would not be until well after dark. Even so, he barely knew them and couldn't be sure they would miss him at all. He had arrived in Lomelito only yesterday, had no business there, and no one expected him anywhere tonight. Moreover, in a place like Lomelito, people probably went off for days at a time with some regularity. How should he know? 4 weeks ago, a nascent adventurer, he'd begun a leave of absence from the law firm in which he was an associate. At the time, he had no intention of returning until he made his way around the world. To South America, then. Europe he had conquered passably in 8 weeks last summer. And Africa and Asia, however long it took. Looking down at the mud forming under his boots, he pondered the wisdom of this ambitious itinerary. Whitehill was a good-natured fellow, of medium height. His lean frame carried the first few extra pounds of middle age, although he looked much younger. The blonde hair he had stopped trying to push off his forehead was never properly combed, giving him a relaxed, boyish appearance that made him attractive to young married women and elderly friends of the family. Under his khaki shirt he wore the uniform of the young American traveler, colored t-shirt, jeans, and dark leather hiking boots with thick waffled soles. Back in the biologist's paradise that passed for his hotel room, a down jacket was jammed into a bulging red backpack. Except for the occasional chin-up or afternoon of tennis, Whitehill had had no real exercise since his entire high school baseball team had been suspended for trapping their coach in the locker room one weekend. He was tired, unprepared. During the last days of the conflict in Vietnam, Whitehill had finessed his way into an Air Force Reserve unit to avoid being drafted in the real Army. 1 weekend a month for 6 years he had trimmed his hair, buttoned and zipped himself into uniform, and driven to Fort Greene, where he filed medical records. His friends slept peacefully those years, knowing that if war were ever officially declared, Whitehill would be manning his filing cabinet, zinging in folder after folder, papers flying, drawers slamming, both hands blurring with the acceleration the war effort demanded. One thing was certain. If the Viet Cong ever overran Pennsylvania, they would capture a set of medical records of which America could be proud. Each Smith filed right down to his middle initial, the Max before the Mix, the Cones cross-referenced with the Cohens. On those days when the military was on without Whitehill status, he practiced his impersonation of an attorney. He took all the courses, received and framed the necessary degrees, and passed several state bar examinations, but his heart was never in it. Whitehill had been among the legion of college seniors who sensed that they were about to be popped into the existential void. One sleepless night they imagined themselves flapping about the streets with no clothes, no direction, no identity, and in the morning they write off for law school applications. Those law school years were difficult for Whitehill. He was forever stumbling through hallways, bouncing around the libraries, knocking into classmates, ranting, "What am I doing here? What's it all about? Where am I? What's happening? Where are we going?" Classmate, "Good morning, Whitehill." Whitehill, "You know, life is strange." His friends were fond of him and treated him like a beloved relation turned eccentric in his later years. Whitehill was universally regarded as an endangered species that had somehow been captured in Pittsburgh. Over these last 6 years he had practiced law and promised himself a long vacation when his hitch in the reserves was over. Then he had given up his apartment, stored his clothes in his parents' attic, downed a few tequilas with his law partners, smoked a last joint with his old college roommates, said goodbye to his girlfriend Monica, who had maintained for months that the trip would be beneficial for their relationship, spent his last Pittsburgh evening in her bed, was thrown out of her apartment at 4 in the morning, "You don't really care about me?" walked 3 miles for a taxi, and landed much later that night in Bogota. Whitehill toured the museums, photographed the monuments, and visited the cathedrals. He took planes, trains, and buses. He learned that everyone in Ecuador is 5 feet tall, that coca leaves in Peru are not chewed like spinach, that Colombia is more famous for its thieves than its pre-Columbian art, and that Bolivians eat a lot of potatoes. He had a fleeting exchange of passion and a darkened